Hey Juniors, how you doing? Yeah, I'm in a different room. Sorry, it's not my house. It's somebody else's house. I don't know what to tell you. All right. Look, I hope you had a good weekend. It's still technically the weekend right now when I'm recording this, but barely. That's all I'll say about that. Okay. Look, today we're going to talk a little bit about Westward Expansion. I'm not going to go on too long. I hope. Okay, here we go. So, James Polk had come into the presidency. We discussed it on Friday, and that was he was coming. He was a Democrat, right? He was kind of a surprise candidate for the Democrat Party. But why did he come in? Well, because he was a proponent of westward expansion, which the Democrat Party was pushing for, and at the time they were pushing, of course, for the annexation of Texas, and they wanted all full control of Oregon, right? They didn't want any part of Oregon to not be under the control of the U.S. So that was that. Okay, and then James Polk, he's also promoting, or he approves of the expansion of slavery. He himself is a slave owner. His family has a cotton plantation in northern Mississippi. Himself, he's from Middle Tennessee, so he's kind of a contemporary of Andrew Jackson. Andrew Jackson, he's they're both from Tennessee. Polk had served as governor of Tennessee. Close knit thing. So when he comes into office, right, he is kind of the leader of this faction for promoting what imperialist, expansionist policy into the West. Okay, and the newspapers will call this manifest destiny. So there's kind of like two competing ideas of what America's destiny is. The Democrats promote this idea of pushing west and of taking over all that territory and opening it up for white settlement. And the Whigs promote, they're more in line with, say, maybe the abolitionists would want. They want a kind of, they see America's destiny to be more of, in a moral sense, of providing an example to the rest of the world of democracy. Okay, and of course the idea there is that conquering lands that are not ours would not be consistent with maybe the vision of America providing a good moral example of how democracy should work. But so there's really two competing things, and there's no like manifest destiny is not universally supported among Americans in the 1830s and 40s. Okay. Um, and the people that do tend to support it are the people that would tend to benefit from it economically. And these are land speculators, railroad promoters, and small farmers who maybe don't have a lot of opportunities in the East and are hoping to gain more land and produce more food and bigger profits out in the West, right? Um, so those are the people that tend to support westward expansion, all right? Whigs also, as we've talked about a lot, tend to support development of the economy in the East, increasing interdependence between the farms and the kind of small but growing industrial economy in some parts of the U.S., and of course the merchant banker faction. So they want a more integrated kind of thing, focused in the East, not moving west. Okay. But of course, Polk is pushing to go west. That's really Polk's whole vision for America here is moving west. Okay, so we're going to kind of talk about three places, right, where people are going. The first being California, which is primarily populated by Indians and then Mexican American ranchers who are raising cattle. Okay, but white people are moving in there pretty steadily. First, they're coming up doing trade coming up the Pacific coastline doing trade with the towns and cities on the California coast. But pretty soon, when you get into the early 1840s, you have people coming over the overland routes through the mountains of the Rocky Mountains, and then moving south down into sort of central California, planting farms down there. Probably the more famous group to come across would have been the Donner Party, and they're famous because they were struck by tragedy. They're known for having. So what happened essentially was they were following this guidebook that had told them to go through the Great Salt Lake. Some of the land around there is very barren, so they kind of got lost a couple of times, I think. And then what happened is when they were going into some Sierra Nevada mountain ranges, I believe it is, they get stuck in an early snowstorm, and they're just trapped in this blizzard essentially for much of the winter. They're running out of food, from what I understand. And then there was reports of some cannibalism. Okay, so they're known for that. But they're also, we could say, there's also some self-sacrifice we can look at here. But why? Because, well, the majority of the people that died were the men. Like 2/3 of the men died, but I think it was like 3/4 of the women and children survived. So the men were trying to sacrifice to keep the women and children alive. So it's not all horrible, but they were trying to get to California. Okay, so this would be before gold is found there. So these people are going there looking for farmland. Oregon, of course, is another big draw for people, and we had fur traders and other types of people going in there early on. But in 1836, you get some missionaries that are going in, white missionaries. And in 1842, one of these missionaries comes back to the East, and he's really pushing the federal government to support a policy of moving into Oregon. And he comes back in 1843. He's got 1,000 people with him, Americans moving into Oregon. And from then, you get a fairly steady movement of individuals and families who want to establish farms there in Oregon. In the pretty nice land out there, and so that's going on. But the big problem for them is that the United States government really has to kind of clarify where the boundaries of Oregon are, and they're kind of negotiating this with the British. And of course, Polk's whole thing had been part of his campaign promise had been, we're going to get all of Oregon, or as much as we can, from the British. But that's kind of being negotiated as Americans are moving into Oregon. Utah is also a big draw, but of course it's the members of they call themselves the Latter-day Saints, right? So other people call them the Mormons, but this is one of the religious movements of the period. And Mormons, of course, would say that that Joseph Smith begins what Mormons call the Christian Restoration. So he's leading this religious movement here, and they're heavily persecuted wherever they go. So they moved out to Missouri. The Missouri governor said he wanted to exterminate them. They locked Joseph Smith up. They go into Illinois. They establish a town in Illinois called Nauvoo, and they do pretty well there. They work very hard. They establish these farmland and so forth, and their population grows really fast. So by 1842, they've got 10,000 people living in Nauvoo, and the city had only been established in 1839, so it grew really quickly up to 10,000 people. Joseph Smith was planning on running for president in 1844, even though he faced a lot of opposition from a lot of different people didn't like the Mormons. And it was kind of like with how the mainstream Americans say they didn't trust Catholics. Well, it's kind of some of them didn't trust the Mormons. There was a lot of anti-Mormon sentiment. So there was kind of some internal divisions among there's kind of a dissident group within Nauvoo. And then, so basically, what happened was these outside militias said they were gonna use this up as an opportunity to go in and basically kind of like attack the Mormons. And so you had these anti-Mormon militias, being put together in these towns of Carthage and Warsaw in Illinois. And so the governor, and so Joseph Smith responds by establishing his own militia. And so the governor then says, "Oh, I'm going to go down there and try and put a stop to this before civil war breaks out." And what happens is they arrest Joseph Smith. The governor puts him in jail, but he doesn't leave a guard around him. He allows these anti-Mormon militiamen to guard him, and so they murder him. And so he never got to run for president because he was murdered. And so then his successor, the leader of the community, is Brigham Young. And Brigham Young is going to organize a mass migration from Nauvoo, Illinois, out to Utah and to the Great Salt Lake. And of course, the reason is they're trying to escape religious persecution. And he organizes a pretty amazing migration of about 17,000. They, they call themselves the Latter-day Saints. 17,000 people moving across the country here. It was between February of 1846 and the end of 1848, I believe, so a couple of years. And he spread it out. So it was really smart the way he organized it, because you'd have like one group planting crops, and then they'd move along, and they'd harvest some crops planted by an earlier group, and they left behind what they had planted, and that was harvested by the group following them. So that all along the route, people were able to have enough food to eat, and just kind of sharing each other's resources as they moved out west. Now, when Brigham Young saw the Great Salt Lake, he said that was the spot because it was barren, it was isolated, and that was exactly what they wanted, because they wanted land that nobody else would want, so that they could be left alone to live in peace, right? So that was the thing. So it was the end of 1847. So really, it took a little less than 2 years for 17,000 people to migrate across to start settling Utah.